The year is 980, and a deep, unmoving stillness has settled over the vast expanses of the Loire Valley. The great river, the wide and silver ribbon that has long carved its way through the heart of the Western Frankish realm, moves with a slow, hesitant grace. The fierce heat of the summer months has lingered far beyond its welcome, stretching into a season of quiet intensity that has hushed the vibrant songs of the woodlands and slowed the rhythms of the old landscape. Along the banks, where the waters once rose to meet the low-hanging branches of ancient willows, the earth has grown dry, revealing a floor of fine, pale sand that gleams like bone beneath the unfiltered light of the sun. The great Carolingian twilight is unfolding across this territory, an era where the distant authority of kings fades into the background, leaving the protection and survival of these lands to the local guardians of the soil. Here, in the quiet heart of the valley, the natural world demands an absolute and reverent attention. The air is thick with the scent of dried wild thyme, sun-baked clay, and the warm, sweet resin of pine forests that line the distant horizons. Every movement in the landscape seems to occur in slow motion. A single hawk glides upon the invisible currents of warm air, its wings outstretched and motionless against a sky of pale, pale blue that holds no promise of clouds. Below, the leaves of the great oaks hang heavy and still, their deep green hues dulled by a thin, delicate veil of dust that has risen from the dry forest tracks. The usual chatter of the riverfront, the splashing of water against wooden fishing skiffs, the gentle rush of currents over deep stone beds, has given way to an immense, profound quietude. It is a time when the land itself seems to be holding its breath, waiting for a cooling breeze that does not arrive. The water of the Loire, usually so grand and unstoppable, has receded into a series of shallow, interconnected pools that mirror the unblinking sky with perfect glassy clarity. In these quiet pools, small pebbles of flint and limestone, polished smooth by centuries of currents, lie exposed to the dry air, their surfaces smooth and warm to the touch. The reeds that border the marshes stand tall and rigid, their golden plumes dry and silent, missing the familiar rustle of the evening wind. The heat does not arrive with violence, rather it settles over the valley like a heavy unseen blanket, soft and inescapable. It slows the steps of the deer that come down to drink at the river's edge, their hooves leaving light, dusty impressions in the hardening mud. It quietens the small villages of timber and thatch that sit nestled in the folds of the hills, where the morning smoke from hearth fires rises straight up into the air, a thin, blue thread that disappears into the endless expanse above. The world feels ancient, fragile, and deeply unified in its stillness. As the sun begins its long, slow descent toward the western hills, the light shifts from a brilliant white to a warm, honeyed amber, casting long, dramatic shadows across the sun-baked plains. The stone walls of the distant abbeys and the timber palisades of the local strongholds catch this golden light, glowing faintly against the darkening landscape. It is an hour of transition, a moment where the heat of the day gently yields to the cool, quiet grace of the coming night, yet the warmth remains embedded deep within the stones and the dry earth, a silent reminder of the unyielding summer of 980. The valley waits, suspended in time, wrapped in a peaceful yet profound solitude that connects every tree, every stone, and every living creature to the quiet pulse of the parched earth. The fading light of dusk gives way to a cool, starlit clarity, yet the dawn of each new morning in the year 980 brings no relief from the persistent warmth. With the arrival of July, the true scale of the river's retreat becomes visible to those who have lived their entire lives along its banks. The Loire is a river of memory, its currents usually wide enough to carry the heavy wooden barges laden with grain, salt, and tufts of white limestone for the construction of new chapels. Now, day by day, the water level drops further, exposing a landscape that had been hidden from human eyes for generations. Island-like sandbars, long submerged beneath fathoms of dark water, rise slowly into the open air like the smooth backs of great river monsters. These newly uncovered islands are vast and pale, composed of fine river silt and thousands of tiny bleached shells that crunch softly under the weight of any waterbird that alights upon them. The main channel of the river, which once rushed with a deep and resonant murmur, has split into narrow, winding ribbons of translucent water that twist lazily around these obstacles. In the shallowest parts, the water is so clear and still that one can count every single pebble on the riverbed. The stones lie there, exposed to the brilliant sunlight, losing their dark, wet luster and turning a chalky, pale grey as the moisture evaporates from their pores. The aquatic plants which once danced fluidly within the strong currents now lay draped over exposed boulders like tangled tresses of dark green silk, drying out and turning brittle under the heat of the midday sun. The air above the water is thick with a shimmering heat haze, a delicate, vibrating mist that blurs the lines of the distant banks and makes the ancient poplars look as though they are floating in mid-air. Along the edges of the river, the dark clay of the banks has begun to dry and shrink. It pulls away from itself, creating an intricate network of fine, deep cracks that resemble the webs of spiders or the delicate lines on an old parchment manuscript. The willow trees that line the banks drop their slender leaves early, a steady, silent shower of yellow and pale green that floats down to rest upon the unmoving water or the dry sand. There is no sound of rushing water anymore. The river has lost its voice, reduced to a faint, gentle lapping sound that can only be heard in the absolute quiet of the middle of the night. The fishermen have brought their skiffs ashore, pulling them high up onto the dry grass where the wood begins to shrink and the pitch cracks in the sun. The nets hang dry and stiff from wooden frames, catching the drifting seeds of wild thistles. Yet, despite the growing scarcity, there is a serene, majestic beauty to this altered landscape. The river, stripped of its power, reveals its inner anatomy, showing the paths it has carved through the bedrock over thousands of years. The colour of the water shifts through the day from a cool slate grey in the early hours of dawn to a deep, brilliant sapphire at noon and finally to a pale, shimmering violet as the evening stars begin to reflect on its glassy surface. The valley has entered a long period of waiting where the passing of time is measured not by the ticking of a clock but by the slow, incremental exposure of another inch of river stone and another foot of dry sand. In the late summer of 980, the changing face of the natural world mirrors the quiet transformation occurring within the human realm. The old Carolingian order, which had for centuries bound these lands under the grand legacy of Charlemagne, is thinning out, dissolving like mist over the morning meadows. The authority of distant kings has become an echo, leaving a vacuum that is slowly being filled by the local lords of the soil, the counts, the keepers of regional strongholds, and the protectors of individual valleys. Power is no longer an abstract decree written in a faraway palace. It is a tangible reality tied directly to the stone walls of local fortresses and the fertility of the surrounding fields. The Thunglung Loire, historically celebrated as the fertile cradle and the great granary of the Western Frankish kingdom, finds itself at the very centre of this political and spiritual shift. For centuries, the wealth of the region flowed as smoothly as its river, carried on the backs of broad merchant vessels that traded in wine, wheat, and fine wool. Now, as the lifeblood of the valley continues to diminish, the vulnerability of this new decentralized power becomes apparent. A feudal lord's strength is measured not just by the sharpness of his knights' swords, but by the security of the harvests that feed his people and the reliability of the streams that turn the wooden wheels of the millstones. Without water, the intricate machinery of medieval life slows to a gentle, worrying halt. The local peasantry, whose lives are bound entirely to the seasonal rhythms of the earth, look up from their parched plots toward the heavy stone towers of their lords, seeking assurance in an uncertain season. In the minds of the people of 980, the physical landscape and the spiritual world are inextricably linked, forming a single continuous fabric of existence. The severe dry spell is not viewed merely as a passing whim of the weather, but as a profound and heavy message written across the sky by a higher power. As the sun continues to bake the landscape day after day without interruption, the unyielding heat is perceived by many as a divine silent commentary on the constant, restless friction and small rivalries that exist between neighbouring territories. The silence of the great riverbed is interpreted as a call for introspection, a prompt for both the powerful and the humble to reflect upon their stewardship of the earth and their duties to one another. The landscape itself becomes a vast quiet cathedral under the open sky, where the dry wind through the golden grasses sounds like a soft collective sigh. It is a period where the traditional boundaries of status begin to soften under the shared experience of the elements, reminding every inhabitant of the valley, from the armoured knight in his high hall to the labourer in the dry field, of their fundamental dependence on the grace of the natural world and the water that sustains it. The channel is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of relaxation and peaceful sleep. Among the many local rulers who watch the changing landscape with a heavy heart is the young Count of Anjou, Fulknera. Known to history as a man of formidable willpower and an architect of unyielding stone fortresses, the young count is more accustomed to the strategic calculations of regional defence and the layout of thick castle walls than the delicate concerns of agriculture. His mind is a map of borders, heights, and tactical advantages. Yet, during these long, quiet weeks of 980, his attention is drawn away from his guard towers and directed toward the very earth upon which they stand. Leaving behind the cool, dark halls of his stone keep, the Count walks out into his domains accompanied only by a few trusted stewards, his heavy leather boots kicking up small clouds of fine, grey dust along the path. To see the young military strategist standing in the middle of a parched meadow, his fingers brushing against the dry, brittle stalks of wheat that should have been heavy with grain, is a stark and moving image. The armour he wears so naturally is set aside for a simple tunic of rough linen, as if he wishes to feel the true weight of the heat that his subjects endure. Fulknera understands that a territory cannot be sustained by stone and iron alone. The real foundation of his strength lies in the well-being of the people who tend the soil and the health of the fields that stretch between his castles. He stops by the edge of an ancient well at the centre of a small farming hamlet, watching as a wooden bucket is lowered deep into the darkness, only to return with a small puddle of muddy water at its bottom. The faces of the villagers are quiet and resigned, their eyes reflecting a patient endurance that touches the young ruler more deeply than any political challenge. He looks out across the vast sweep of the Anjou countryside, where the green hills have faded into a soft pale ochre, and realizes that the enemy he faces this season cannot be met with an army or defeated with a siege. This enemy is invisible, carried on the warm, dry breeze that rustles the dying leaves of the orchard trees. It is a moment of profound internal shift for the young count. The strategic mind that once calculated the trajectory of stones from a catapult now begins to ponder the depth of the earth's water tables and the flow of hidden springs. He spends his evenings not with military manuals or treaties, but with the elderly land stewards, listening intently to their descriptions of how the waters moved in the days of his grandfathers. The maps laid out on his heavy oak table are no longer plans for expansion but careful drawings of the valley's geography, tracing the lines of dry stream beds and marking the locations of the oldest, deepest wells. In this quiet season of reflection, the fierce protector of Anjou begins to transform into something greater, a leader who understands that true governance requires building and sustaining life, not just defending borders. The heavy stillness of the summer night settles over his castle, but inside the lamps burn late as the Count prepares a new kind of campaign, one dedicated to finding the deep waters that sleep beneath the sun-baked limestone of his land. Beyond the heavy oak doors of the Benedictine monasteries that rise along the hillsides of the Loire, a different kind of vigilance is maintained. In the quiet world of the scriptorium, where the only sound is the soft, rhythmic scratching of goosequill pens on sheepskin parchment, the monks of 980 keep a meticulous record of the changing world. To these men of the cowl, the monastery is not an escape from reality, but a vantage point from which to observe the profound mechanics of creation. The long tables of the scriptorium are covered with ancient volumes, some dating back to the days of the Western Roman Empire, containing forgotten knowledge of natural philosophy, geometry, and the subtle movements of the earth. Near the tall arched windows that look out over the hazy valley, an elderly monk adjusts a brass astrolabe, its polished rings catching the warm afternoon light. For months, the community has observed the night skies with a quiet intensity, noting the unusual clarity of the stars and the absence of the moist, western vapours that traditionally roll in from the distant Atlantic coast. The records they keep are precise. the date the first swallows departed, the exact height of the river against the foundation stones of the monastery pier, and the premature colour changes of the woodland leaves. They treat the weather not as an isolated event, but as a long historical narrative that must be understood through the lens of past centuries. In the margins of their theological commentaries, the scribes write of previous summers of great dryness, looking for patterns in the memories of the old saints. Yet their focus is deeply practical. The Benedictines live by the rule of labour and prayer, believing that the intellect must be used to serve the immediate needs of the community. As the small streams that power the abbey's grain mills slow to a trickle, the monks leave their writing desks to inspect the complex system of stone water channels and cisterns that their predecessors constructed. They understand the nature of the local limestone, the porous rock that forms the bedrock of the entire region, capable of swallowing whole rivers and hiding them in vast, dark caverns deep underground. The monastery library becomes an archive of hope, a place where maps of ancient Roman aqueducts and descriptions of subterranean springs are carefully studied by candlelight. The monks know that somewhere beneath the parched, dusty surface of the valley, the waters are still flowing, cold and pure, insulated from the fierce heat of the summer sun. It is a quiet sanctuary of intellect and faith, where the patience of the scholar meets the practical skill of the craftsman. As the evening bell begins to chime, its deep bronze note floating out over the unmoving trees of the valley, the monks close their heavy ledgers, their minds filled with data, geometry, and a growing determination to unlock the secrets that lie buried deep beneath the sun-baked earth. The long days of August roll forward, each afternoon identical to the last, characterized by an immense unbroken dome of pale blue sky. In the cultural mindset of the late 10th century, this lack of change is deeply meaningful. To the people living along the Loire in 980, the sky is not an empty atmospheric void, but a living threshold, a canvas through which the intentions of the universe are continuously made visible. When the high, thin clouds appear on the western horizon, only to dissipate into nothingness before sunset without shedding a single drop of moisture, it is viewed as a form of profound cosmic silence. This persistent dryness creates a unique atmosphere of collective introspection across the hamlets and fortified towns of Anjou. In the fields, where the earth has hardened into the consistency of stone, groups of labourers gather under the shade of ancient hedgerows during the hottest hours of the day, speaking in low, quiet tones. They talk of the grand order of the seasons, remembering how the rains used to arrive in gentle, rhythmic intervals, washing the dust from the grapevines and filling the forest ditches with cool water. The absence of this familiar rhythm forces a shift in focus from the immediate tasks of the day to the deeper, unseen structures of their world. There is an unspoken understanding that the community must look inward, seeking a renewed sense of harmony and purpose to match the stillness of the environment. This spiritual weight does not manifest as panic. Instead, it creates a solemn, quiet solidarity. The shared experience of watching the horizons for any sign of a grey shadow or a cool breeze draws the scattered populations closer together. Neighbouring villages, which might have engaged in small disputes over pasture boundaries or timber rights in previous years, now find themselves facing the same quiet sky, their common reliance on the earth smoothing over old grievances. The landscape itself seems to participate in this quiet vigil, the dry grasses bowing slightly under the warm wind, pointing toward the east like lines of silent figures in prayer. It is a period where the material and the immaterial aspects of life blend seamlessly, and the simple act of looking up at the unmoving stars becomes an exercise in patience and endurance. The world feels small, intimate, and profoundly interconnected beneath that vast, cloudless ceiling as everyone waits together for the natural world to reset its ancient cycle. All stories presented on this channel are global historical tales, gently curated and narrated based on themes such as the rise and fall of nations, human cultures, and extraordinary journeys through time. As the late summer weeks deepen, the physical transformation of the Loire landscape becomes an intimate, sensory experience for those who walk its paths. The great riverbanks, which once hummed with the damp, rich life of the wetlands, have hardened into a dark, brittle crust. The deep clay has shrunk under the unblinking eye of the sun, pulling apart into wide, jagged fractures that split the earth like ancient runes. Walking along these dried shores, the sound of one's footsteps changes. The soft, damp squelch of river mud is replaced by the sharp, metallic snap of sun-baked clods breaking underfoot. A few miles inland, the great forests of Anjou, normally alive with the rustle of green canopies and the damp undergrowth of fern and moss, have entered a state of profound quietude. The air beneath the ancient oaks and beeches is thick and warm, smelling deeply of dried tinder, fallen pine needles, and the sweet concentrated musk of sun-warmed bark. The small woodland streams, which usually tumble over green stones and feed the deep forest pools, have vanished entirely, leaving behind only winding pathways of smooth grey gravel and dry, white moss. The silence here is immense. The birds have ceased their daytime singing, choosing instead to rest deep within the thickest thickets, their wings stilled to conserve energy in the heavy air. Only the dry rhythmic rasp of cicadas cuts through the afternoon heat, a sound that seems to amplify the stillness rather than break it. The forest floor is covered in a premature carpet of crisp, brittle leaves that have dropped from the stressed trees, creating a golden, rustling sea that crackles loudly at the slightest movement of a field mouse or a passing deer. Every creature moves with a deliberate, slow-motion grace, respectful of the scarcity that surrounds them. At the forest edge, the wild blackberry bushes hold fruit that is small, tight and dry, their juices withheld by the roots to keep the vines alive. Yet, within this dry quiet, there is no sense of death, rather, it is a magnificent display of nature's endurance, a landscape that has adjusted its breath to survive a period of trial. The trees drop what they do not need, the animals seek the deepest shade, and the earth itself locks its moisture deep within its dark subterranean heart, waiting with an ancient, patient confidence for the return of the waters. The high stone walls of the Castle of Angers rise above the valley like a mountain of dark slate and pale limestone, their battlements cutting a sharp silhouette against the brilliant sky. From these lofty ramparts, Count Fulknera looks out over his domain, his hand resting on the smooth, warm stone of a parapet that had been designed to withstand the heaviest engines of medieval warfare. For years, his mind has been occupied with the physics of defense, the thickness of curtains, the placement of arrow slits, and the strategic positioning of bastions along the shifting borders of his territory. Yet, as he surveys the wide panorama of Anjou, he is struck by a quiet, sobering realization. The thickest walls and the most formidable iron gates are utterly powerless against the silent, creeping approach of the Drought. The high towers can keep out rival counts and mercenary armies, but they cannot prevent the grain from withering in the ear or the communal wells from drying to dust. The true wealth of his realm is not locked away in his treasure chests or recorded in the ledgers of his tax collectors. It is found in the vitality of the common fields and the survival of the families who labour in them. Without water, the grandest fortress becomes nothing more than a hollow monument of cold stone, an empty shell overlooking a silent landscape. The Count walks slowly along the wooden hoardings, listening to the unusually quiet sounds of the town below. The heavy iron hammers of the blacksmiths strike the anvils with a dull, rhythmic thud that seems to hang in the warm air, and the great wooden wheels of the town mills stand completely stationary, their paddles dry and splintering above the unmoving mill races. He can see the empty granaries, their wide wooden doors thrown open to let the dry air circulate, revealing the dusty floors where the winter stores should already be accumulating. It is a moment of profound clarity for the young strategist. The governance of a territory, he perceives, is not merely a matter of military dominance and territorial expansion. It is an act of deep, reciprocal stewardship between the lord and the land. He turns his gaze from the horizon and looks down into the castle courtyard, where his master masons and carpenters are gathering, their leather aprons stained with mortar and sawdust. The plans they carry are no longer designs for outer defensive walls or fortified gatehouses. Instead, the Count calls for a new kind of engineering, one that requires piercing the very bedrock of his lands to find the hidden sources of life that the sun cannot reach. Southward along the meandering path of the river, the landscape opens into the undulating slopes of Touraine, a region celebrated since the days of the early kings for its expansive, sun-drenched vineyards. Here, the long, neat rows of grapevines follow the natural contours of the limestone hillsides, their roots traditionally drinking from the deep, moist strata of the valley. In this unusual summer of 980, however, the vineyards present a scene of quiet, arresting transformation. A slow walk down the narrow, sandy lanes between the vines reveals a world texturized by the intense, prolonged heat. The soil beneath the vines, usually a rich, damp mixture of dark earth and chalky white stone, has turned to a fine, powdery dust that rises in small, silent plumes around one's ankles, coating the lower leaves in a delicate layer of greyish white. The vines themselves have adjusted their growth to meet the challenge of the sky. The large, broad leaves that normally shield the fruit from the direct sun have grown crisp and curled at the edges, their vibrant greens fading into shades of pale sage, pale bronze, and ochre. Touching them, they feel as dry and fragile as ancient vellum, rustling with a faint, paper-like sound as the warm breeze from the south drifts through the rows. The grape clusters, which should be swelling with the sweet, cool juices of the earth, hang small and tight against the old wood of the stalks. They are dark and concentrated, their skins slightly wrinkled as the vine holds back its moisture, prioritizing the survival of its deep roots over the abundance of its fruit. Yet, despite the lack of rain, there is an extraordinary resilience displayed across these hillsides. The deep root systems of these old plants, some of which have burrowed dozens of feet into the porous limestone bedrock over decades, continue to find the faint, hidden memories of water locked away in the cool depths of the earth. The air between the rows is heavy and sweet, filled with the concentrated aroma of sun-cooked sap, dried earth, and the faint, warm fragrance of wild lavender that grows along the stone boundary walls. As the late afternoon light hits the slopes, the entire vineyard seems to glow with a soft, iridescent warmth, a landscape of bronze and gold that stands as a testament to the quiet, unyielding endurance of the valley's soil. Under the sweeping boughs of an ancient oak tree that has stood for over 2 centuries near the banks of the Mayenne, a silent assembly takes place. Count Fulknera has gathered his oldest land stewards, the grey-bearded elders of the villages, and the chief bailiffs of his estates. The shaded area beneath the tree provides a brief, cool sanctuary from the brilliant midday sun that bathes the surrounding fields in white light. The atmosphere is solemn, lacking the usual clank of armoured knights or the loud declarations of territorial disputes. Today the maps spread out upon the low wooden table are not military charts marking the weaknesses of rival fortifications in Blois or the marching routes through the western marches. Instead, the documents are old estate surveys written on thick parchment detailing the locations of natural springs, forgotten watercourses, and the depth of the communal wells built during the times of the early Carolingian kings. The young count sits quietly at the head of the table, his fingers tracing the faint ink lines that represent the veins of his territory. He listens intently as the elders speak, their voices low and gravelly, filled with the practical wisdom of men who have watched the soil change through decades of seasons. They speak of how the water behaves when the great river recedes, pointing out specific low-lying meadows where the grass remains greenest and where the wild reeds continue to grow, indicating that a hidden current flows just beneath the limestone crust. Fulknera shifts his focus entirely from the theatre of regional warfare to the immediate mechanics of domestic survival. He asks detailed questions about the storage of grain, the condition of the remaining livestock, and the amount of labour required to clear the silted channels of the town cisterns. It is a meeting driven by practical necessity and a shared sense of responsibility. There is no talk of conquest or prestige here. The only goal is to preserve the quiet pulse of life within the valley. As the sun slowly moves across the sky, shifting the patterns of shade beneath the great oak, a collective plan begins to take shape. It is a strategy of excavation, a decision to organize the human resources of Anjou not for the building of defensive walls, but for a coordinated descent into the earth to unlock the cool, abundant waters that have slept undisturbed beneath the sun-baked plains for centuries. High within the thick stone walls of the Abbey Library, where the air remains remarkably cool and carries the comforting scent of beeswax and dry leather, the Benedictine monks continue their quiet research. The large arched windows are partially covered with thick linen drapes to keep out the blinding glare of the summer afternoon, allowing only a few soft beams of golden sunlight to illuminate the heavy wooden reading desks. Upon these tables lie rare and precious manuscripts, some salvaged from the ruins of old Roman villas that had once dotted the shores of the Loire centuries ago. With gentle, reverent fingers, the monastic scholars turn the heavy parchment pages, focusing their attention on the faded diagrams and Latin descriptions of ancient engineering. They study the detailed notes of Roman surveyors who had masterfully mapped the subterranean geography of the region, noting how the ancient engineers could locate hidden veins of water by observing the behavior of morning mists or the types of wild herbs that grew in specific rocky fissures. The monks are particularly interested in the construction of deep, stone-lined cisterns and the methods used to pierce the thick strata of porous limestone that underpins the entire valley. They find records of long-forgotten aqueducts that once carried clean, cold water from distant hillside springs to the old Roman towns, tracing where these underground channels might still intersect with the modern fields of Anjou. It is a slow, methodical process of rediscovery, where the intellectual heritage of the past is directly applied to the survival of the present. The abbot stands behind the seated scribes, his eyes following the intricate geometric calculations written in the margins of a 5th century text, translating the ancient measurements into practical directives for the labourers who stand ready outside. They understand that what appears from the surface to be a completely dry and barren landscape is actually a complex, hidden network of water, a silent world of subterranean rivers and cool reservoirs that have been insulated from the fierce heat of the summer sun. By combining their faith with this practical, long-forgotten science, the monks are preparing to step out of their sanctuary and serve as the true engineers of their community, bridging the wisdom of antiquity with the immediate, urgent needs of the parched valley. In the small farming hamlets that lie clustered in the shallow folds of the Anjou hills, the daily rhythm of existence has softened into a state of quiet conservation. The traditional sounds of rural labour, the sharp ring of scythes, the shouts of ploughmen, and the heavy thud of timber being split for building, have ceased entirely, replaced by a deep and patient stillness. The village square, typically bustling with activity from dawn until dusk, is empty during the long middle hours of the day when the heat hits its peak. The small houses, built of sturdy timber frames and thick walls of wattle and daub, offer a dim, cool refuge from the blinding light outside. Inside these humble dwellings, families sit quietly on low wooden benches, their movements deliberate and slow, conserving every ounce of physical energy to match the stillness of the natural world. The children rest on beds of dry straw, listening to the gentle hum of the bees in the thatch overhead, while the elders speak in low murmurs about the ancient patterns of the sky. Outside, the village livestock, the heavy-set oxen and the small sheep, are gathered under the wide shade of communal elm trees, their heads hung low and their breathing slow and steady. The small vegetable plots attached to each cottage are quiet, the dark soil dried to a fine grey crust that covers the deep roots of cabbages and leeks. There is no sense of panic in this stillness. Rather, it is a display of traditional wisdom, an understanding passed down through generations that when the elements grow unyielding, human life must mirror that unyielding nature with patience and calm. The women occasionally walk to the central village well, carrying large earthenware jugs balanced carefully on their shoulders. Their steps are measured and rhythmic, a slow dance across the dusty ground that ensures not a single drop of the precious, clear liquid is spilled upon its return. As the sun begins to sink lower, casting long, cool shadows across the thatched roofs, the village slowly wakes from its midday slumber. Neighbours stand at their doorways, greeting one another with quiet nods of solidarity, their shared endurance creating a bond that is stronger than any stone wall. The air begins to cool slightly, carrying the scent of dried wild grass and the faint smoke of cooking fires, a gentle reminder that despite the trials of the summer, the quiet circle of life in the hamlets continues its steady, unhurried journey through time. At the great wooden gates of the Benedictine Abbey, an extraordinary gathering takes place as the afternoon heat begins its long, slow retreat. Under the wide archway of grey stone, where the shadow of the monastery walls provides a deep and cool sanctuary, three distinct worlds of the medieval realm come together in a quiet, unprecedented alliance. Count Fulknera stands at the centre, surrounded not by his usual retinue of heavily armed knights, but by his master builders and chief land stewards. Facing him are the abbot and the senior monks of the community, their simple dark robes a stark contrast to the rich linen tunic of the young ruler. Clustered around the perimeter, standing quietly on the dusty path that leads up from the valley, are the elders and labourers from the surrounding farming hamlets, their faces lined with the practical wisdom of those who work the soil. This assembly represents the entirety of the valley's life, the nobility who hold the political authority, the clergy who guard the knowledge of the past, and the peasantry whose hands sustain the daily pulse of the land. There are no loud proclamations or traditional gestures of feudal submission. The common challenge of the drought has smoothed over the rigid boundaries of hierarchy, replacing them with a shared, practical purpose. The abbot holds a wide sheet of thick parchment, unrolling it across a low stone balustrade, so that both the count and the village elders can see the geometric drawings written upon its surface. The document contains a detailed survey of the subterranean geography of the abbey lands, marking the locations where the ancient limestone strata dips lowest and where the hidden veins of water are most likely to pool. The monks explain their calculations using simple, clear language, translating the old Latin concepts of hydrology into practical instructions that the village builders can easily understand. Fulknera listens intently, his fingers tracing the drawn lines of the proposed wells, nodding in agreement as the elders point out the specific low meadows where the moisture historically lingers longest. It is a moment where the intellectual heritage of the library meets the physical strength of the workforce and the strategic organizing power of the Count's court. Together they form a single, unified body, moving beyond the traditional roles of their stations to act as a collective team of engineers dedicated to the survival of their shared home. As the meeting concludes, a quiet determination settles over the crowd, a shared understanding that the path forward lies not in passive waiting, but in a coordinated, deeply respectful descent into the earth to claim the cool, life-giving currents that sleep beneath the sun-baked stone. Inside the quiet sanctuary of his private solar, where the thick stone walls keep out the remaining warmth of the late afternoon, Count Fulknera works late into the evening. The large oak table, which for years had been the staging ground for regional military campaigns, has undergone a complete transformation. Gone are the heavy parchment rolls that detailed the fortifications of rival lords, the weak points along the borders of Blois, and the troop movements through the western marshes. In their place, the young count has spread out a collection of hand-drawn geographical surveys, carefully crafted by the Benedictine scholars and his own chief land stewards. These new maps are not charts of conquest, but intricate blueprints of the hidden world that lies directly beneath the feet of his people. With steady, deliberate movements, the Count places smooth river stones on the corners of the documents to keep them flat against the wood, his eyes scanning the delicate ink lines that trace the veins of subterranean water. The maps show where the soft limestone bedrock of Anjou dips into deep underground valleys, where the porous rock traps the winter rains far below the surface, and where the ancient, hidden springs are most likely to be found. For the military strategist, this is a new kind of topography, a realm where victory is measured not by the capturing of a hill or the breach of a town wall, but by the precise intersection of an iron-tipped pick and a hidden reservoir of water. He leans low over the table, his fingers tracing a line that represents a long-forgotten subterranean current that flows beneath a cluster of dry farming hamlets. He makes small, neat annotations in the margins, calculating the number of labourers required to clear the topsoil, the amount of timber needed to shore up the deep shafts, and the quantity of iron picks that the blacksmiths must forge. The fierce energy that had once been directed toward the defense of borders is now entirely channeled into this quiet work of creation. He understands that his duty as a leader has shifted. The survival of his realm depends on his ability to think like an engineer, to organize the resources of his territory for a deep, coordinated exploration of the earth. As the candle on his desk flickers gently in the cool breeze that finally begins to drift through the open window, the young count sits back, looking at the complex network of lines before him. The silence of the castle around him is profound, but it is no longer a silence of uncertainty. It is a quiet space of preparation, a moment where the strategist has found his new objective, ready to lead his people not into battle, but down into the cool, dark depths of the valley to reclaim the life-giving currents that have slept undisturbed beneath the sun-baked stone. With the arrival of the early morning hours, before the sun can assert its full power over the valley, the first teams of surveyors step into the low meadows of Anjou. This group is composed of the oldest Benedictine monks who carry with them the weight of textual knowledge and the most experienced labourers of the hamlets who possess an intuitive understanding of the soil. Together they move slowly across the pale, dry grass, their eyes scanning the landscape for the subtle clues that indicate the presence of water deep below the surface. They watch the behaviour of the early morning air, looking for the faint, elusive tendrils of ground mist that occasionally rise from specific hollows just before the dawn breaks. These mists, though thin and fleeting, are a reliable sign that a hidden source of moisture continues to breathe beneath the limestone crust. The surveyors also observe the flora, noting where the deep-rooted wild elderberry bushes or clumps of dark green rushes manage to maintain their vitality despite the intense dryness of the surrounding plains. The older monks use traditional, non-intrusive water divining techniques, holding slender, flexible branches of hazelwood between their fingers as they walk with measured, rhythmic steps across the fields. They pay close attention to the architecture of the land, tracing the natural fault lines in the rock formations and mapping the low depressions where the winter rain historically gathered and seeped into the subterranean strata. It is a process that requires an absolute, quiet concentration, a willingness to tune one's senses to the silent, hidden language of the earth. The young Count Fulknera often walks alongside these teams, his quiet presence offering a steady reassurance to the workers as they mark the locations for the first major excavations with wooden stakes driven deep into the parched soil. The entire valley feels connected in this moment of quiet focus, as the collective intellect and physical experience of the community are brought to bear on a single vital objective. Every small discovery, a patch of damp earth beneath a boulder, a cluster of green moss hidden in a rocky crevice, is treated with a quiet reverence, a small beacon of hope that confirms the ancient maps of the scribes were correct. The journey to reclaim the life of the valley has begun, not with the loud clank of armour or the grand gestures of statecraft, but with the slow, deliberate steps of men walking through the quiet dawn, listening to the deep secrets of the land they call home. If you find comfort in these peaceful journeys through the quiet corners of history, consider subscribing to the channel, liking this narrative, and sharing it with others who appreciate a restful escape into the past. In the shadow of the great timber barns that border the primary excavation sites, the materials of human industry lie prepared for the task ahead. These are the tools of the late 10th century, simple, heavy, and forged with an honest durability that reflects the straightforward relationship between medieval man and the elements. Laid out in neat rows upon the dry grass are dozens of heavy iron picks, their thick heads shaped by the village blacksmiths over hours of intense rhythmic hammering. The iron is dark and dimpled from the forge, its surface cool to the touch in the early morning air, waiting to be swung against the unyielding layers of limestone bedrock. Alongside the picks rest the wooden spades carved by hand from single blocks of split ash and white oak. The edges of these spades have been reinforced with thin, curved strips of hammered iron, a design that allows the wood to cut through the compacted topsoil without splitting or wearing away. There are also heavy wooden mallets and wide iron wedges, tools designed to wedge into the natural fissures of the rock and split the great stones apart through sheer, patient pressure. Perhaps most vital to the entire enterprise are the great coils of braided hemp rope that lay stacked like sleeping serpents near the wellheads. These ropes have been spun by the village elders over many weeks, their thick strands composed of thousands of tightly twisted fibres that provide an immense, reliable strength. Touching the rope, it feels rough and prickly, smelling deeply of dried grass and the warm oil used to preserve its flexibility. These lines will be the lifelines of the project, responsible for lowering the workers into the dark depths of the shafts and hauling the heavy stone debris back up to the surface in wide, staved oak buckets. Every tool carries the history of the hands that made it, an expression of the community's practical capability and collective resolve. The workers gather around these implements with a quiet, businesslike calm, checking the handles for any tightness, ensuring the iron heads are securely wedged, and running their palms along the ropes to check for any fraying. There is no haste in their preparations. They understand that the journey into the earth will be a long and deliberate process, requiring a patient rhythm that matches the steady nature of the stone they are about to pierce. The air is quiet, holding only the faint metallic scent of the iron and the clean organic fragrance of the wood and hemp, a gathering of simple materials ready to be transformed by human willpower into a conduit for the deep waters of the valley. As the golden heat of the afternoon finally dissolves behind the western ridges of Anjou, the true work of the excavation begins. To escape the fierce, energy-sapping power of the daytime sun, Count Fulknera and the monastic engineers have chosen a different rhythm for their labourers. Under the vast clear canopy of the late August night, the digging sites are illuminated by the soft, warm glow of numerous tallow lamps and small controlled fires of oak branches. The air is cool and refreshing, carrying a gentle breeze that moves through the valley like a quiet sigh, bringing a renewed vitality to the men who gather around the marked wellheads. Above, the sky is a magnificent sea of deep indigo, crowded with millions of brilliant, unblinking stars that cast a soft, ethereal light over the entire landscape, eliminating the need for harsh, blinding torches. The scene is one of surreal, tranquil beauty. The deep silence of the rural night is broken only by the rhythmic, musical clink of iron picks striking the limestone bedrock, a sound that echoes softly through the valley like the steady ticking of an ancient clock. The workers move with a measured, deliberate pace, their shadows stretching and contracting gracefully against the white stone as they lift and swing their tools under the starlight. There is an unspoken understanding among the men that haste is the enemy of safety in the darkness. Each movement must be careful, each footstep secure. The Benedictine monks stand near the edge of the shafts, their dark figures silhouetted against the night sky as they hold small oil lanterns to guide the diggers or check the alignment of the wooden shoring with heavy plumb lines made of lead and hemp twine. The cool night air carries the clean, sharp scent of fresh stone dust and the rich, damp aroma of the earth that is slowly being turned over for the first time in centuries. It is an hour when the usual divisions of the world seem to dissolve completely. Knights, monks and serfs work side by side in the cool darkness, bound together by the shared music of the tools and the common pursuit of the water that sleeps below. As the constellations slowly rotate across the great dome above, marking the quiet passage of the hours, the depth of the well grows inch by inch, a steady, patient descent into the dark heart of the valley that transforms the challenging landscape into a place of peaceful collective creation. Deep within the growing shadow of the main excavation pit, a figure moves with the same steady, unhurried rhythm as the professional stonemasons. It is Count Fulknera, his presence at the very bottom of the shaft serving as a silent, powerful testament to his commitment to the valley's survival. The young military commander, whose hands are more traditionally accustomed to the polished leather hilt of a broadsword or the smooth reins of a destrier, has completely adapted his strength to the requirements of the stone. His fingertips are coated in a fine white limestone dust that fills the small creases of his skin, and his palms have developed new thick calluses from hours of lifting the heavy, rough-hewn blocks of bedrock that are being cut from the earth. To watch the Lord of Anjou work alongside his subjects, his linen tunic damp with the honest sweat of physical labour under the cool starlight, is an image that redefines the very nature of authority in this changing era. He does not offer loud commands or distant encouragement from the safety of the surface. Instead, he takes his turn at the heavy iron wedges, holding the metal steady while an elderly mason strikes it with a massive wooden mallet, the dull, resonant thuds vibrating through the very soles of their feet. The experienced craftsmen work around their ruler with a quiet, respectful familiarity, recognizing that in the darkness of the pit, the stone makes no distinction between noble blood and common birth. The limestone yields only to patience, accurate strokes, and a deep respect for its natural grain. Fulk Nerra finds a unique meditative peace in this heavy labor. The complicated anxieties of regional politics and the constant calculations of castle defense fade into the background, replaced by the simple immediate geometry of the excavation. His focus narrows down to the next fracture line in the rock, the secure placement of a timber prop, and the slow, rhythmic filling of the staved oak buckets that are continuously hauled up into the starlit night above. This shared physical experience creates an unbreakable, unspoken bond between the leader and his people, a mutual understanding born of dust, stone, and shared purpose that will outlast the summer crisis and leave an indelible mark on the memory of the entire province. As the excavation descends further beneath the surface, a new and distinct environment begins to envelop the diggers. At a depth of 20 feet below the valley floor, the fierce warmth of the summer sky loses its hold entirely, replaced by a deep, constant cool that belongs to the subterranean world. The physical reality of working inside this limestone trench is a sensory experience of shadows and stone. The walls of the shaft are composed of alternating bands of white and pale cream limestone, rock that was formed millions of years ago by the ancient seas that once covered this part of the Frankish realm. The lantern light catches the tiny glistening facets of ancient mineral deposits and prehistoric sea structures embedded in the stone, creating a faint, starry pattern that surrounds the workers as they descend. The air here is thin and crisp, carrying a distinct metallic stillness that tastes of flint, damp chalk, and cold earth. Every sound within this confined space is amplified. The sharp ring of an iron pick against a flint nodule cracks through the shaft like a small clap of thunder, followed by a soft, whispering hiss as the loosened stone dust trickles down to the bottom of the pit. The shadows cast by the tallow lamps are long and dramatic, dancing slowly across the pale rock faces like silent giant figures following the rhythm of the tools. The diggers find that their breathing slows naturally in this cool enclosure, their bodies finding a steady, tireless pace that was impossible under the burning sun above. They are completely insulated from the outer world. They can no longer see the unmoving oaks or the dry sandbars of the receding river, nor can they feel the warm breeze that rustles the thatch of the villages. Their entire universe has narrowed down to the dimensions of the stone box they are creating, a subterranean sanctuary where the passage of time is measured only by the changing color of the limestone strata and the gradual lengthening of the hemp ropes that connect them to the starlit sky above. A descent into the lengthening shafts of the Anjou wells offers a gradual sensory transition that marks the workers' deep progress into the heart of the valley. Clinging to the sturdy rungs of the rough-hewn ash ladders or swaying gently within the heavy loop of a braided hemp rope, a man leaves behind the dry, rustling world of the surface. In the upper sections of the dig, the environment is defined by the sharp, dusty smell of baked red clay and dehydrated topsoil, a scent that has come to symbolize the long, unyielding summer of 980. But as one sinks lower, passing inch by inch through the ancient geological layers, the air undergoes a remarkable, comforting transformation. The dry, powdery dust that coats the throat begins to thin, replaced by a cool, clean crispness that feels heavy with an invisible, awakening vitality. The scent profile shifts entirely. The metallic tang of dry flint and chalky limestone gently gives way to the deep, rich fragrance of damp soil, a dark, cool aroma that has not seen the light of the sun for thousands of years. It is the scent of potential, the unmistakable breath of a subterranean landscape that has managed to hold on to its moisture, keeping the lifeblood of the region safe from the parching winds above. The walls of the shaft, once rough and chalky to the touch, feel different against the palms of the diggers. They are cool, almost soft, absorbing the light of the oil lamps rather than reflecting it in a harsh glare. This olfactory shift brings an immediate unspoken wave of relief to the entire excavation team. They do not need to see the water to know it is near. Their senses tell them that they have successfully pierced the dry shell of the valley and are now entering the cool, damp sanctuary where the ancient currents sleep. The mood within the pit becomes one of quiet, reverent anticipation, each man moving with a renewed, gentle energy, their tools carving through the dampening earth with a smooth, satisfying rhythm that sounds like a soft whisper against the dark stone. While the rhythmic work continues deep within the starlit earth, a parallel act of devotion unfolds within the quiet walls of the abbey's scriptorium. There, removed from the immediate physical strain of the excavation pits, the older monks sit at their heavy oak desks, keeping a meticulous and permanent record of this extraordinary season. A single candle burns with a steady golden flame, casting long, soft shadows across the rows of bound volumes and the smooth sheets of sheepskin parchment laid out before the scribes. With slow, deliberate movements, an elderly monk dips his goosequill pen into a dark, iron gall ink, his hand moving across the page with a practiced, elegant grace that has been refined through decades of service. The records he creates are far more than a simple ledger of measurements. They are the narrative heart of the community's struggle, preserved so that future generations might understand the true cost of the water that sustains them. Every evening, a young novice brings the latest data from the digging sites, whispering the numbers into the quiet room. The scribe records the exact depth reached by each team, the nature of the stone strata encountered, whether soft chalk, hard grey flint, or damp loam, and the names of the men who laboured in the shafts. In the wide margins of the parchment, the monk adds delicate, descriptive notes about the state of the valley, the unusual behaviour of the birds, the temperature of the midnight breeze, and the shared meals eaten by knights and peasants at the wellheads. This act of writing is a form of quiet stewardship, an understanding that the memory of communal resilience is as precious as the harvest itself. The ink dries slowly in the warm room, leaving a dark, permanent testament to the summer of 980, a physical artifact that will sleep within the abbey archives for centuries, long after the dry sky has broken and the great river has returned to its traditional boundaries. The steady progress of the excavation encounters its greatest obstacle in the quiet hours before dawn, at a depth where the cool air feels thick and ancient. Deep within the central shaft, the iron pick of a master mason strikes the floor, producing not the familiar dull thud of damp limestone, but a sharp, clear ring that vibrates through the handle like a string on a harp. The tool sparks against the dark ground, leaving only a faint white scratch on a surface that has suddenly turned unyielding. The workers stop, their breathing loud in the confined space, as they lower their oil lamps to inspect the change. They have struck a thick, continuous horizontal layer of dense grey flint stone, a geological barrier known to the old builders as the iron stratum of the valley. This rock is incredibly hard, capable of blunting the sharpest iron picks in a matter of minutes and turning the smooth progress of the excavation into a slow, exhausting trial of endurance. News of the barrier travels quickly up the hemp ladders to the surface, where Count Fulk Nera and the senior Benedictine engineers are conferring over their maps. The discovery tests the collective resolve of the tired community. To pierce this layer using the tools of the 10th century requires an absolute, unhurried patience. There can be no heavy swinging or forced speed, as a single careless blow could shatter a valuable iron head or cause a dangerous fracture in the wooden shoring above. The engineers do not despair. They understand that nature does not yield its treasures easily, and that this hard crust often serves as the protective roof over the largest subterranean reservoirs. The Count descends into the pit once more, his calm presence reassuring the men as he helps position the wide iron wedges along the natural hairline seams of the grey stone. They shift their strategy from rapid digging to a method of slow, rhythmic fracturing, using the heavy wooden mallets to strike the wedges with a steady, musical cadence that fills the dark shaft with a deep, resonant hum, a declaration of human persistence against the ancient foundations of the earth. Surrounding the primary excavation site, the temporary camp has settled into a state of serene, starlit tranquility. The heavy machinery of the day's preparation is quiet, and the landscape is bathed in the soft iridescent glow of a high silver moon that moves lazily across the deep indigo sky. Small, controlled cooking fires of dried willow and ash branches burn at gentle intervals between the tents, their flames glowing like low amber embers that cast long, warm shadows across the grass. The air is remarkably clear, carrying the crisp, refreshing scent of the forest and the clean, mineral aroma of the freshly turned stone that sits stacked in neat pyramids near the wellhead. Scattered around these low fires, groups of labourers, stonemasons and off-duty guards sit quietly on woolen cloaks or overturned timber logs, their bodies relaxing after the intense physical exertion of their shifts. The conversations are carried out in soft musical murmurs, low hums of human voices that blend seamlessly with the natural night sounds of the valley. They speak of simple, comforting things, the quality of the evening bread, the traditional stories of their ancestral villages, and the unusual brightness of the northern constellations that seem to keep a watchful eye over their project. There is no tension or anxiety in this gathering. The shared experience of the work has created a deep, comfortable camaraderie that eliminates the need for loud declarations or formal social boundaries. A young monk moves quietly between the groups, carrying a large staved wooden bucket of diluted orchard wine, offering a cool drink to those who have just ascended from the deep shaft. The horses and oxen are tethered nearby under the wide canopy of an ancient elm, their steady, rhythmic breathing adding a comfort bass note to the peaceful atmosphere of the camp. It is a moment of profound collective rest, a quiet space in the middle of the night where the community finds its strength not in isolation, but in the gentle, reassuring presence of one another under the open, starry sky of Anjou. To overcome the immense physical challenge of hauling the fractured flint and heavy limestone from the deepening shaft, the Benedictine engineers turned to the precise laws of mechanics. Near the edge of the pit, under the soft guidance of lantern light, a team of monastic carpenters completes the assembly of a grand wooden pulley system built according to the classical architectural principles preserved in their library's ancient manuscripts. The framework is constructed from thick, seasoned beams of heart oak, chosen for its dense grain and resistance to splitting under heavy tension. At the center of this structure sits a massive wooden drum carved by hand from a single trunk of a wild cherry tree, its surface polished smooth with beeswax to allow the heavy ropes to glide without friction. The system utilizes a complex arrangement of multi-wheeled blocks where small discs of self-lubricating boxwood rotate smoothly on iron axles, distributing the weight of the stone buckets so effectively that a fraction of the human effort is required to lift them. The assembly of this machine is a masterclass in quiet efficiency. Every timber joint is secured with tight, square wooden pegs rather than brittle iron nails, ensuring the entire frame can flex slightly and absorb the shifting strains of the lift. As the workers at the bottom of the well finish filling a wide, iron-bound oak bucket with grey stone debris, they give a low, melodic call up the shaft. On the surface, two sturdy labourers step up to the great wooden spokes of the capstan, moving with a slow measured tread that sets the cherrywood drum into a quiet rhythmic rotation. The thick hemp rope grows taut, its braided strands groaning softly as they settle into the grooves of the pulleys, but the ascent is perfectly smooth and steady. The heavy stones rise out of the dark pit into the starlit night with a graceful, effortless motion, a beautiful demonstration of how human intellect, when applied with patience and respect for natural geometry, can lighten the physical burdens of the world and unlock the deepest secrets of the earth. Near the eastern edge of the encampment, under the wide and protective canopy of a sprawling chestnut tree, the communal kitchen operates with a quiet, comforting regularity. In this season of scarcity, the preparation of food has been elevated to a shared ritual, a gentle manifestation of equality that binds the entire community together. Two massive iron cauldrons hang from thick tripod frames over low, steady fires of seasoned ash wood, their contents bubbling softly with a slow, inviting murmur. The fragrance that drifts from the hearth is simple and grounding, a blend of dried wild leeks, sweet roots of parsnip, and the coarse, nutty aroma of boiling emmer wheat. The rations are modest, managed with a careful economy by the abbey's cellarer, yet there is an abundance of care in how they are distributed. When the wooden boards are laid out as long tables on the dry grass, no distinction is made based on rank or station. Count Fulknera sits on a simple timber bench between an elderly stonemason and a young farm labourer, his wooden bowl filled with the exact same thick-grain pottage as theirs. Next to him, a heavily armored knight breaks a piece of dense, dark barley bread, sharing the loaf with a novice monk whose hands are stained with the ink of the scriptorium. This shared table represents a profound, quiet shift in the social fabric of the valley. Under the unyielding sky of 980, the traditional barriers of feudal life have been set aside, replaced by a deep and mutual respect born of common labour and a common goal. The act of eating together in the cool night air becomes a peaceful sanctuary from the physical trials of the day, a moment where the simple textures of coarse bread and warm broth bring a deep sense of security and comfort. The human voice remains low and melodic, a soft tapestry of sound that matches the gentle crackle of the hearth fire, as everyone draws strength from the quiet solidarity of the collective table.
As the calendar of 980 moves steadily through the later weeks of August, the great vault of the night sky over the Loire Valley begins to show the subtle, majestic signs of a changing season. The deep indigo dome, which has stood cloudless and immense throughout the long midsummer, shifts its celestial configuration with a slow, silent grace that is observed with great reverence by the monks and the laborers alike. High above the parched oak forest and the pale, receding waters of the river, the bright constellations that define the peak of the heat wave begin to descend toward the western horizon. Sagittarius, with its sharp patterns of brilliant stars, sinks lower into the evening haze, while the great constellation of Cygnus, the celestial swan, floats directly overhead, its wide wings stretched across the pale band of the Milky Way like a silver cross marking the center of the heavens. In the early hours before the dawn, the keen eyes of the midnight watchman can detect the rise of the first autumn stars, the brilliant, icy spark of Capella climbing slowly above the northeastern ridges, bringing with it a faint, almost imperceptible promise of cooler air from the high latitudes. This slow rotation of the sky serves as a comforting reminder to the community that time is not stationary. The universe is maintaining its ancient cyclical journey, and the unyielding intensity of the summer must eventually yield to the shifting architecture of the cosmos. The light cast by these distant stars is soft and cool, bathing the deep excavation pits and the silent thatched villages in an ethereal radiance that seems to soothe the dry earth below. The people look up from their work at the wellheads, their faces illuminated by the pale starlight, finding a quiet source of endurance in the steady, predictable movements of the heavens. A celestial calendar that promises that every trial has its natural boundary and every season its appointed end. If you find peace and comfort in these slow, reflective journeys through the forgotten quiet of our shared past, please take a moment to subscribe, like the video, and share this story with others who appreciate a restful educational escape into history. Deep within the ancient woodlands of Anjou, removed from the rhythmic sounds of the human excavation sites, the natural world maintains its own quiet survivalist choreography. A walk through the heavy shadows of the old-growth oak and hornbeam forest reveals a landscape that has entered a state of profound collective focus. The air beneath the thick interlocking canopy is warm and perfectly still, smelling intensely of dried bracken, sunbaked moss and the sweet concentrated resin of old pines. The forest floor is a carpet of copper and gold, covered in a thick layer of brittle leaves dropped early by the stressed trees to protect their innermost moisture. In this dry sanctuary, the movements of the wildlife are slow, deliberate, and entirely silent. The red deer, usually so swift and vocal during the late summer weeks, move through the thickets like graceful ghosts, their hooves stepping with absolute precision to avoid the sharp, loud crack of dry twigs. They are following an ancient, inherited memory, a subtle geography of survival that leads them down into the deepest, narrowest ravines where the sun's rays never directly penetrate. In these hidden hollows, where the porous limestone forms small, shaded amphitheatres, the earth remains dark and damp. Here, tiny prehistoric springs, too small to be marked on any map, continue tip from the rock faces drop by single drop, pooling into smooth stone cups hidden beneath cushions of resilient green fern. The birds of the forest gather here in the quiet hours of the afternoon, their wings stilled as they sit patiently on low-hanging branches, waiting their turn to descend and drink from the cool liquid. There is no conflict or competition among the different species at these remaining sanctuaries. The shared experience of the scarcity has created a quiet, natural truce, an unspoken understanding that mirrors the peaceful cooperation of the humans working in the valley below. The forest holds its breath, a magnificent, living monument of endurance that trusts entirely in the deep, hidden currents of the earth to sustain its pulse until the sky finally remembers the rain.
The midnight hour brings a profound stillness to the high solar of the castle at Angers. Count Falkner sits alone at his heavy oak desk, the cool night breeze from the open casement window causing the single tallow candle to flicker gently, casting long, contemplative shadows across the stone walls. Outside, the valley sleeps under a vast blanket of stars, the quietude broken only by the distant rhythmic clink of iron picks from the nearest well site. The young count has spent his entire early life preparing for a world defined by conquest, the defense of physical borders, and the strategic expansion of his familial lands through the cold geometry of siegecraft and fortresses. Yet, as he looks down at the maps of underground water veins spread out before him, his mind undergoes a quiet, irreversible transformation. He realizes that the true measure of a ruler's legacy is not written in the blood of won battles or the height of defensive battlements, but in his capacity to preserve and sustain the life of the people who trust in his protection. To conquer a border is a fleeting thing, a line drawn on parchment that can be erased by the next generation's rivalries, but to find water, to pierce the dark limestone foundations of the earth, and unlock a permanent source of vitality for a parched valley, is an act of creation that will endure for centuries. His role has shifted from a warlord to a steward, a guardian whose primary duty is to align his authority with the fundamental needs of the soil and its cultivators. He feels a deep, unprecedented peace in this understanding. The heavy anxieties of regional conflict melt away into the quiet darkness of the room, replaced by a profound sense of purpose that is as solid and unyielding as the bedrock beneath his feet. As he leans forward to extinguish the candle, the young leader commits his full will to the task ahead, ready to face the dawn not as a conqueror seeking borders, but as a builder dedicated to the long, peaceful survival of his home. Deep within the central well shaft, at a depth where the starlit sky has narrowed to a small brilliant circle of indigo, the character of the excavation changes completely. The master mason, who has spent the last 4 hours rhythmically swinging his heavy iron pick against the floor, stops mid-strike, his ears catching a subtle change in the acoustics of the pit. The sharp metallic ring that had echoed off the hard flint and limestone for days has softened into a dull, heavy thud. He lowers his tallow lamp, its golden light illuminating the floor of the shaft, and calls for the other diggers to look down. The pale, chalky dust that has coated their leather boots and dried their throats for weeks is gone. In its place, the grey limestone chips are mixed with a thick, heavy substance that clings to the wood of their spades. The dry earth has transformed into a cold, dark mud. The texture of the ground is thick and cool, absorbing the pressure of their steps with a soft, squelching sound that brings an immediate, breathless silence to the entire team. A young farm labourer kneels in the darkness, reaching down with his bare hands to scoop up a handful of the black earth. It is freezing to the touch, heavy with an invisible, awakening vitality that smells deeply of deep stone channels, forgotten mineral veins, and the pure breath of underground rivers. This damp loam is the unmistakable signal they have been searching for, the protective shield that sits directly above the primary subterranean reservoir of the valley. The news travels up the hemp ladders with the speed of a whisper, passing from the diggers to the monks holding the plumb lines, and finally out onto the surface where the camp sits under the midnight stars. There are no loud shouts or celebratory cheers. The relief that washes over the community is too deep for noise. Instead, a wave of quiet, reverent focus settles over the site as the workers prepare their heavy iron-bound buckets for the final delicate phase of the descent, knowing that they are just inches away from unlocking the cool, abundant heart of Anjou. Deep within the narrow stone cylinder of the central well shaft, the atmosphere changes from an exhausting struggle against rock into a space of quiet, breathless anticipation. The heavy iron picks and wide wooden spades have been set aside, their surfaces coated in a thick, dark grime that speaks of the deep layers crossed during the long night hours. The 2 stonemasons remaining at the bottom of the pit do not swing their tools. Instead, they kneel on smooth, split oak planks that keep them from sinking into the freezing, heavy mud that now covers the limestone floor. They hold their small tallow lamps low, almost touching the ground, the flickering amber flames casting a concentrated, warm glow across a tiny, shallow depression in the stone. There, in the very center of the dark earth, the light catches something entirely new, a faint trembling shimmer that does not belong to the dry minerals or the ancient flint. Drop by single drop, a pristine cold moisture is beginning to weep from the microscopic fissures of the bedrock, gathering into a small delicate pool no wider than a man's palm. The water is completely still, acting as a tiny liquid mirror that reflects the golden point of the lantern flame with a perfect, unwavering clarity. The two men watch this small phenomenon in absolute silence, their breathing slow and measured in the cool subterranean air, as if the slightest sound might disrupt the fragile convergence happening before their eyes. This is not yet the powerful rush of a subterranean river, but it is the undeniable awakening of the valley's hidden lifeblood. The moisture feels incredibly cold against the tips of their calloused fingers, carrying a pure metallic sharpness that has been preserved far below the surface, completely insulated from the parching winds and the burning sky above. The long, exhausting journey through the solid strata of Anjou has reached its turning point. This quiet gathering of glimmers is the first physical proof that the ancient calculations of the Benedictine scholars were correct. A silent beacon of hope that promises the deep currents of the earth are ready to answer the patience and resilience of the community. The ascent of the very first wooden vessel from the depths of the limestone shaft is a process managed with an absolute reverent slowness. At the surface, the morning air is still cool, the pale golden light of dawn just beginning to catch the top of the oak timber derrick that stands over the wellhead. A quiet crowd has formed in a wide circle around the perimeter, stonemasons with white dust still lining their eyebrows, Benedictine monks holding their heavy woolen habits against the morning breeze, and farming families from the nearest hamlets, all standing in a state of breathless, unmoving concentration. No one speaks. The only sound in the entire clearing is the structural groan of the great cherrywood drum as two sturdy labourers slowly turn the massive wooden spokes of the capstan. Near the edge of the pit, Count Fulknera stands with his hands resting on the smooth grey stone coping, his eyes fixed on the dark opening where the thick braided hemp rope descends into the earth. The line moves upward inch by inch, its twisted fibres taut and wet, dripping tiny clear beads of moisture back into the darkness below. Deep within the shaft, the heavy oak-staved bucket, reinforced with thick bands of hammered iron, rises through the shadows with a gentle swaying motion, completely filled with the pristine liquid harvested from the subterranean bedrock. When the rim of the wooden vessel finally clears the top of the stone coping, a collective, silent intake of breath ripples through the crowd. The water within the bucket is so cold that a delicate white vapour drifts across its surface, moving softly in the morning light. It is perfectly transparent, entirely free of mud or grit, carrying only the brilliant, mirror-like reflection of the pale blue sky and the high silver clouds that are finally beginning to gather on the distant horizon. The labourers guide the heavy bucket onto a flat timber platform with meticulous care, ensuring not a single drop of the precious current is spilled onto the dry grass. A simple wooden vessel holding the very first tangible proof of the valley's survival. The true relief of the breakthrough manifests in the sensory experience of the water as it is poured from the wooden bucket into the long, shallow stone troughs that line the wellhead. The master carpenter gently tips the heavy oak vessel, and the first broad stream of liquid rushes out with a clean, splashing sound that shatters the long silence of the clearing. As the crystal-clear current hits the dry grey limestone of the troughs, an immediate, cool fragrance fills the morning air, a scent that combines the crisp sharpness of subterranean minerals with the rich, deep breath of the dark earth. The water is freezing to the touch, so cold that condensation instantly forms on the outside of the stone containers, turning the rough surfaces slick and dark. The exhausted community moves forward with a slow, orderly reverence, their shared fatigue giving way to a quiet, deep-seated joy. An elderly labourer is the first to step up, his hands trembling slightly as he cups them beneath the flowing stream. When he brings the water to his face, the intense chill brings an instant, revivifying shock to his sun-baked skin. He drinks deeply, his throat moving in a slow rhythm as the sweet, pure liquid washes away the chalky dust of the weeks of excavation. Behind him, mothers dip small linen cloths into the trough, gently pressing the freezing fabric against the foreheads of their resting children, while the young novices from the abbey fill their earthen jugs to the brim, laughing softly as the cold drops splash against their bare feet. The immediate physical relief is profound. The burning tightness that had gripped the chests and throats of the people for months dissolves entirely in the presence of this abundant, flowing wealth. To touch, smell and taste the clean water after so many days of unyielding heat is an experience that redefines the very atmosphere of the valley, turning the parched clearing into a sanctuary of renewal, where the collective exhaustion of the body is completely forgotten in the soothing, cool embrace of the earth's deepest gift. With the immediate survival of the community secured by the flowing wellhead, the focus of the enterprise shifts toward the preservation of the surrounding landscape. Under the clear, systematic direction of the Benedictine engineers, the labourers begin the vital task of distributing the subterranean water to the nearest parched fields and wilted orchards. The monks lay out long, straight lines across the baked earth using heavy lead weights and braided hemp twine, tracing the natural contours of the low valley to ensure a slow, steady gravity-fed descent. Along these precise trajectories, teams of peasants and stonemasons construct a network of narrow stone channels, using flat slabs of pale limestone that are fitted together with a tight, dry joint technique that minimizes water loss into the porous subsoil. The physical reality of this construction is a beautiful display of medieval engineering. Each stone segment is carefully sloped at a gentle angle, no greater than a single inch of drop for every 10 paces, allowing the precious liquid to glide smoothly without gaining enough velocity to erode the banks or damage the fragile roots of the crops. The older monks stand at the joints of the main channels, using small wooden gates carved from split willow to regulate the flow, directing the cool current into different sections of the arable land according to a meticulous schedule designed by the abbey's cellarer. As the first wooden gates are slowly raised, the water flows into the newly carved stone arteries with a soft whispering hiss, its dark, reflective surface moving steadily across the white limestone base. The dry, dusty paths that cross the fields are suddenly bordered by these cool, murmuring ribbons of clarity, bringing a dramatic visual transformation to the landscape. The sight of the clean water moving deep into the agricultural zones brings a renewed sense of purpose to the tired workers, who walk alongside the stone channels with their wooden rakes and spades, ensuring the path remains free of debris and watching as the lifelines of the project spread their vital moisture across the ancient soil of Anjou. As the water moves through the narrow stone channels, it finally reaches the small earthen sluices that open into the abbey's ancient orchards and vegetable gardens. The parched ground, which has been baked to the hardness of brick by the long summer sun, receives the liquid with a deep, silent intensity. The physical process of absorption is slow and beautiful to observe. When the first clear stream glides over the dry furrows of the kitchen gardens, the earth does not mud instantly, but rather draws the moisture inward through a network of tiny hair-like fractures in the clay. A soft whispering hiss rises from the soil as the dry air trapped within the crust is displaced by the cold subterranean current, releasing a rich, damp aroma of wet flint and reviving loam that fills the entire enclosure. Beneath the surface, the root systems of the ancient pear and plum trees begin to feel the awakening vitality of the water. For months, these deep roots had remained dormant, coiled tightly within the dry limestone strata to conserve the tree's innermost sap. Now, as the cold moisture seeps down into the deeper layers, the wood begins to drink once more. The change is subtle yet profound. The limp, silver-grey leaves that hang from the lower branches seem to hold themselves with a renewed, gentle tension, their stems straightening slightly as the moisture climbs through the dark heartwood of the trunks. In the small vegetable plots, the young novices guide the water around the bases of wilted leeks and parsnips with small wooden paddles, ensuring that the current settles deeply around the main stems without pooling too long on the surface. There is an absolute quiet in the garden as this irrigation unfolds, a peaceful sanctuary where the only sound is the steady, rhythmic trickling of the water as it disappears into the dark earth, transforming the parched landscape square by square into a place of slow living renewal. The arrival of the late August evenings brings a new and tranquil atmosphere to the entire Loire Valley. The air remains warm, holding on to the deep heat that has baked the ancient stone walls and oak forests for months, but the oppressive weight of total ruin has completely lifted from the landscape. As the sun sinks behind the western ridges, casting long amber rays across the smooth limestone coping of the new wellheads, the community gathers in the cooling shadows to rest. The constant, desperate anxiety that had defined the peak of the midsummer crisis is gone, replaced by a quiet, deep-seated confidence born of their shared victory over the dry earth. From the high terraces of the abbey, the view across the valley reveals a scene of profound peace. The small cooking fires of the farming hamlets send thin, straight lines of blue smoke into the cloudless twilight sky, while the rhythmic, musical creak of the wooden well pulleys continues to echo softly across the quiet meadows. The water channels glide through the fields like ribbons of dark glass, keeping the soil damp and the crops stable against the remaining summer heat. The people move with a slow, relaxed grace, their voices carried on the gentle evening breeze in low, melodic murmurs. The knights have laid aside their heavy armor, sitting in their linen tunics alongside the monks and laborers on the cool grass, sharing the evening bread with a sense of comfortable camaraderie that has become the permanent hallmark of this unforgettable season. The threat of starvation and exodus has been answered by the steady, cold current rising from the deep limestone strata, and as the first silver stars begin to appear in the vast indigo sky, the valley settles into a deep, restful silence, a community that has looked into the face of disaster and found its sanctuary in the enduring strength of its own unity. The final days of August bring the first subtle, long-awaited shifts to the high architecture of the sky. For months, the dome of the heavens has remained a fixed, unmoving vault of deep sapphire blue, entirely devoid of moisture or motion. But as the sun dips lower toward the western horizon on this quiet evening, the keen eyes of the watchmen on the towers of Angers detect a change in the quality of the upper atmosphere. Far out toward the western horizon, where the mouth of the Loire River meets the vast expanse of the distant Atlantic coast, the stark clarity of the sky begins to soften into a pale, translucent haze. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, thin ribbons of soft grey vapour begin to drift inward across the low coastal plains, carried by a new and refreshing wind that smells faintly of salt, wet sand, and deep ocean currents. These are not yet the heavy, dark storm clouds that bring torrential downpours, but rather the gentle forerunners of an atmospheric transition, fragile, wispy plumes of sea mist that catch the dying rays of the sun, turning the evening sky into a tapestry of muted lavender and pale rose. As this oceanic breeze moves inland, it breaks the suffocating stillness that has held the valley captive since June. The leaves of the ancient oaks rustle with a dry, musical sound, and the warm air rising from the parched earth begins to mingle with the cool, heavy moisture of the sea. The people look up from their evening tasks at the wellheads, their faces cooled by this stranger from the west, finding in the changing configuration of the clouds a profound, silent confirmation that the unyielding reign of the great drought is drawing to its natural historic end. The arrival of the autumnal equinox brings a decisive, cooling breath to the year 980, marking a majestic transition in the long struggle of the valley. The high silver clouds that began as faint ocean mist on the horizon have now assembled into a vast protective canopy of soft slate grey, completely shielding the parched earth from the fierce, direct glare of the sun. The temperature drops steadily day by day, replacing the dry, heavy heat of the summer with a crisp, invigorating sharpness that feels cool against the skin and clean in the lungs. Across the wide plains of Anjou, the seasonal shift is announced by a magnificent collective rustling. The ancient oak and hornbeam forests, which have held onto their leaves through months of intense drought, finally begin to surrender their foliage to the strengthening northern winds. A continuous gentle shower of copper, amber and gold drifts down from the canopy, covering the dry limestone paths and the stone channels with a thick, crackling carpet of fallen leaves. The sound of the wind through these dry branches is deep and melodic, a natural symphony that sounds like the long, collective sigh of a landscape that has finally been permitted to rest. The lifestyle of the community adapts smoothly to this cooler rhythm. The intense, midnight digging shifts are no longer necessary. Instead, the workers spend the comfortable daytime hours reinforcing the wellheads against the coming winter and ensuring the stone irrigation channels are clear of autumnal debris. There is a profound sense of completion in the air, an understanding that they have successfully bridged the gap between the seasons through their patience and labor. As the evenings lengthen, the fires within the hamlets and the abbey granges are moved indoors, their warm, amber light glowing through the low doorways as the families gather to tell the story of the great summer well. The sky remains dark and heavy with the promise of rain, a grand atmospheric architecture that stands as a silent monument to the changing year, proving that every trial has its natural boundary and every season its appointed end. If you have found a deep sense of peace, comfort, and restful escape in this long historical journey through the forgotten quiet of our shared past, please take a moment to subscribe to Midnight Daisy History, leave a like on this video, and share this story with others who appreciate a mindful, educational retreat into the rhythms of old world history. Your support keeps our scriptorium alive, allowing us to continue crafting these immersive narratives for your rest and reflection. The long-awaited return of the rain begins not with a sudden storm, but with a fragile, hesitant whisper in the dark hours before the dawn. The great slate-grey canopy of clouds that has hung over the Loire Valley for days settles lower, turning the air thick, cool, and perfectly still. Then a single heavy drop of water falls from the gloom, striking the flat limestone coping of the central wellhead with a sharp, clear tap. A moment later, another drop hits the dry, curled leaf of an ancient chestnut tree, producing a soft, hollow rustle that shatters the absolute silence of the sleeping encampment. Slowly, the rhythm quickens into a steady, gentle downpour that covers the entire landscape in a vast grey curtain of moisture. The sensory impact of this first rain is an overwhelming, beautiful transformation. As the cold drops strike the parched, dusty thatch of the cottage roofs and the sun-baked stones of the abbey walls, they release a rich, intoxicating aroma that has been locked within the earth for months. The deep, ancient fragrance of petrichor, where the clean, metallic sharpness of the sky blends with the sweet, dark breath of reviving loam and wet flint. It is a scent that instantly fills every hallway, solar and bedroom in the valley, a physical declaration of renewal that awakens the sleeping community more effectively than any church bell. The sound of the rain is a magnificent, low-toned symphony that settles over the land. It hums across the wide, cracking fields, its steady drumming filling the deep fissures in the clay and turning the pale, chalky dust into a rich, dark mud that drinks the moisture with a silent, insatiable intensity. Along the narrow stone channels built by the monks, the falling drops create millions of tiny interlocking ripples on the surface of the moving current, a liquid geometry that catches the first faint grey light of the morning. People move to their doorways in their linen tunics, standing entirely still beneath the eaves, their faces turned upward to receive the cold, wet mist that drifts on the breeze. They do not shout or cheer. The relief that fills their chests is too immense, too sacred for noise. They simply watch as the endless grey lines of the rain wash away the chalky white crust of the summer, restoring the deep natural colours of the bark, the stone and the soil, a gentle and unhurried cleansing that marks the true rebirth of Anjou. The true awakening of the valley is realised along the wide ancient course of the Loire River itself. For months, the great riverbed had remained a silent, pale desert of dry sandbars, exposed gravel beds, and bleached limestone boulders that stood like forgotten monuments in the heat. But now, fed by the steady, persistent rains that blanket the high hills of the interior and the small, reviving tributaries of Anjou, the water begins its majestic return. The initial movement of the river is remarkably slow and gentle. It does not arrive as a violent, muddy flood, but rather as a calm, transparent current that moves forward over the sun-baked sand with a soft, whispering hiss. The rising water fills the deep, isolated pools first, connecting them one by one like a string of silver beads being rethreaded by an invisible hand. As the current glides across the old stones, it washes away the pale crust of dried algae and river silt, restoring the deep, natural colours of the dark basalt and smooth quartz that have been hidden from sight since June. The physical transformation of the riverbed is a beautiful, slow-paced spectacle. The water snakes through the winding channels of the dry basin, its leading edge clear and reflective, carrying a few scattered autumn leaves of copper and gold that have drifted down from the overhanging forest canopy. Step by step, the wide sandbars that had forced the ferryboats into stagnation are submerged beneath the rising glass of the river until the entire bed is unified once more into a single, continuous flow. The sound of the moving water is a deep, comforting murmur, a steady rhythmic pulse that returns to the valley its ancient voice, a declaration to the birds in the reeds and the people along the banks that the great lifeline of the Carolingian world has found its strength once more. Long after the historic autumn of 980 had passed and the heavy rains had fully restored the natural balance of the Loire Valley, the deep stone wells built during the Great Crisis remained standing as permanent structures within the landscape. The interlocking blocks of grey limestone which had been set into the dark earth under the guidance of the Benedictine engineers did not shift or crumble with the passage of the seasons. Instead, they became fixed monuments to a generation's quiet resilience, enduring physical anchors that connected the daily life of the hamlets to the deep, silent currents of the subterranean bedrock. For centuries, these wellheads served as the functional and social heart of the regional communities. Long into the high medieval era, when the old Carolingian world had completely given way to the rising architecture of the Capetian kings, the village women still gathered around the smooth stone coping each morning, their wooden buckets rising and falling on heavy iron chains that wore deep, smooth grooves into the lip of the limestone. The water that rose from the shafts remained remarkably constant, always freezing to the touch, sweet and perfectly clear, entirely unaffected by the heavy winter floods or the brief droughts of the shifting centuries. The physical permanence of these structures transformed them into sacred landmarks of historical memory. When the descendants of the original labourers walked past the massive oak timber frameworks, they did not just see a source of water, they saw a monument to an unprecedented peace. They remembered the story, passed down through generations of oral storytelling and meticulous monastic logs, of a summer when the traditional barriers of feudal life were set aside in favour of a common salvation. The deep wells stood as physical proof that when human intellect, spiritual discipline and physical labour are bound together by a shared purpose, a community can descend into the darkest, hardest strata of the world and find the permanent path to its own survival. From the high battlements of his stone fortress at Angers, Count Fulknera looks out over a landscape that has been completely transformed by the turning of the year. The early morning air is crisp and cool, carrying the rich, damp fragrance of late autumn soil and the steady, distant murmur of the fully restored Loire River. Below the castle ridges, the wide plains of Anjou are no longer a parched expanse of grey clay and wilted vines. They have returned to a vibrant living tapestry of deep green meadows, freshly turned brown earth and ancient forests that carry their seasonal colours of copper and bronze with a quiet dignity. As the young count rests his hands against the cool stone of the parapet, he reflects on his own internal transformation. He began the summer as a traditional warlord, a ruler whose identity was defined by the cold geometry of military conquest, the height of defensive bastions, and the unyielding enforcement of territorial borders. Yet, as he looks down at the permanent stone wellheads dotting the valley floor, their wooden pulleys moving smoothly as the farming families gather their morning supply, he realizes that his true legacy was forged not by the sword but by the spade. The crisis of 980 had offered him a choice between the exercise of absolute authority or the practice of absolute stewardship. By choosing to lay down his military maps, by choosing to labour alongside his stonemasons and share the meagre barley bread of his serfs, he had discovered a deeper, more permanent form of power. A fortress can be besieged and dismantled by a rival dynasty, but a well, a permanent gateway to the life-giving currents of the deep earth, is an act of creation that embeds a ruler's memory into the very survival of his people. He stands in the pale morning light, a young leader forever changed by the season he chose to build instead of destroy, watching his domain step forward into a peaceful, secure future with a heart that is as grounded and resilient as the limestone foundations of his land. The great wheel of time maintains its slow, majestic rotation, carrying the year 980 into the quiet archives of the past. Along the winding banks of the Loire River, the natural rhythms of the earth have fully reasserted their ancient, comforting dominance. The pale silver mists of late autumn drift softly through the reeds and over the dark, moving glass of the current, which flows once more with a deep and steady pulse toward the distant Atlantic coast. The landscape has settled into its winter rest, the deep scars of the great summer drought completely healed by the persistent rains and the cool, protective cover of the seasonal frost. This enduring valley stands as a silent testament to the cyclical nature of water, history, and human endurance. Generations will come and go along these pale limestone ridges, kingdoms will rise and fade like the morning mist, and the names of those who dug the deep shafts may eventually dissolve from the parchment of the monastic chronicles. Yet the water itself remains an eternal shifting current that remembers every season of scarcity and every moment of abundance, flowing silently beneath the soil and across the plains to sustain the heartbeat of the land. The story of the Anjou wells is ultimately not a tale of conflict or ruin, but a gentle reminder that even the heaviest, most unyielding trials have their natural boundaries, yielding always to the patience, intellect, and quiet solidarity of those who choose to build together. This concludes our 42-part historical journey through the forgotten quiet of the year 980. Thank you for travelling through this deep, immersive chapter of Old World history with us. If this narrative brought a sense of peace, education, and restful escape to your day, please consider subscribing to Midnight Daisy History, leaving a like on this video, and sharing your reflections in the comments below. Your presence and support help keep our scriptorium alive, allowing us to continue crafting these long-form, mindful sanctuaries into the rhythms of the past. Until our next journey together, sleep well, stay curious, and may your path be peaceful. The channel History Under Moonlight is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of relaxation and peaceful sleep. All stories presented on this channel are global historical tales, gently curated and narrated, based on themes such as ancient mysteries, forgotten chronicles, and the calm, reflective moments of our shared past through time.